dissing, rap beef, response records. This has all been a part of hip-hop for decades now. For the 50th anniversary of hip-hop, I've put together a list of 50 of my favorite diss tracks of all time. This really isn't an exact ranking of this track as better than this one, but rather a celebration of some of the hardest tracks. I'm sure a lot of you will find some of your favorites here. Toss some of your own in the comment section below too. Obviously, every good diss track ain't gonna make the list, and also the list isn't really in order, but the first dozen or so songs are my favorites out of the list for the most part. The rest are up for debate on where I'd rank them exactly. Starting off, we have No Vaseline, the classic diss track by Ice Cube from his second solo studio album, Death Certificate. Considered by many to be one of the best diss tracks of all time, and I'm certainly in agreement there. Ice Cube took aim at his former group, N.W.A, and their manager, Jerry Heller. Ether, from Nas's fifth album, Stillmatic. This is the song that put the word ether into the hip-hop lexicon. Nas went in on Jay-Z here in response to Takeover and prior shots made at him by the Rockefeller crew. On a lot of rap diss track lists, you'll see this one listed, with good reason. Dollars and Cents, from DJ Quick's third album, Safe and Sound, as well as the Murder with the Case film soundtrack, it's aimed at fellow Compton rapper MC8. Who can forget the classic lines, "Giving your set a bad name with your misspelled name, EIHT, now shall I continue? You left out the G cause the G ain't in you." Takeover, from Jay-Z's fifth album, The Blueprint. It's well known for being a Nas diss track, but it's far from being just that, however, as throughout the first two verses, Jay mainly disses Prodigy from Mobb Deep as he was embroiled in a beef with them as well right around this time. This is the track where Jay-Z hinted at having an affair with Nas's ex-fiancée, which escalated the beef to another level. Next up we have Against All Odds, from the 7 Day Theory album, which saw Tupac taking aim at several people he took issue with. If you saw my video about why Hit 'Em Up isn't Tupac's best diss song, then you probably remember that I mentioned Against All Odds as my personal favorite diss track by Tupac and one of my favorites overall. Not only did Pac diss several New York rappers, but also Jimmy Henchman and Haitian Jack, who allegedly had something to do with the Quad Studio shooting as well as his rape case. Second Round Knockout, from Cannabis's debut album, Can I Bust? How many diss tracks can you name that came from a rapper new to the game going at a certified great over a decade into his career? Maybe a few, but how many came this hard? And how many had Mike Tyson do the intro? Real motherfucking G's. What can you say about this track? Probably a lot, honestly, but yeah, it's yet another classic. This was featured on Eazy-E's second EP. It's on Dr. Dre 187 Killer, which was full of diss tracks to Dr. Dre and Death Row Records. The song features Gangsta Dresta and BG Knockout. The classic line, "Dre Day meant Eazy's payday," came from this track. The Bitch and You. From the very start of the track, Common lights Cube up for what Common perceives as hypocrisy and disses fellow Westside Connection members Mac 10 and WC while he's at it. The beef might have started over a misunderstanding, but Common cleared things up with this track right here. He wasn't meaning to offend anyone, but if it's beef, then it's on then. The Bridge is Over. BDP is well known for their beef with the Juice Crew, or more specifically, KRS-One and MC Shan. A rap beef even longer than 50 Cent and Ja Rule's. The Bridge is Over was featured on the group's first album, Criminal Minded, and is still one of the hardest diss tracks there is. Back Down, from 50 Cent's debut studio album, Get Rich or Die Tryin'. This wouldn't be a list of top diss tracks without mentioning 50 Cent at least once, if not 2 or 3 times. Back Down is once again another diss track aimed at his longtime enemy, Ja Rule. This track had 50 even having a line about Ja's wife and children even, territory that many people just don't touch in rap beef. Speaking of 50, a lot of rappers have dissed him, but none did it better than Jadakiss in my opinion. Checkmate had Jada rapping over the same beat as the 50 Cent track, I'm an Animal, on which 50 dissed Murder Inc. and Supreme. Jada proved to be even more of an animal on his clap back at 50 though. One of the funniest lines? And I don't got a problem with clout. You ain't get shot again yet, so what's your second album about? Next up, Story of Adidon, Pusha T's most well-known diss to Drake. This was like the diss track of the year. From the artwork of Drake being in blackface to all the bars aimed at Drake and his relationship with his parents, Push came at him hard, no pulling punches. This track also caused some controversy due to Push's lines about Drake's friend and producer N.W.A, aka 40, who has multiple sclerosis. Shether, the classic Remy Ma diss track aimed at Nicki Minaj. Shether gets its name from the earlier mentioned Nas track, Ether, and just like that track, this one is full of venom for her opponent. Several claims are thrown out about Nicki Minaj on this track, from cosmetic surgery, ghostwriting, and even the allegations against her brother. One of the biggest and most recent diss tracks by a female rapper without a doubt. The Oracle. In response to several shots from Cameron over the years, Mace decided to hit back hard with this track. Who was expecting this from Mace? Not me, but I definitely consider another one of the better diss tracks from the past decade. So disrespectful. 50 Cent has a way for dissing people and being quite petty. This is his second appearance on this list, but trust me, it isn't his last one. 50 took shots at not only Game and Young Buck, but also his own ex, Shaniqua, the mother of his first son. Next up, I'm calling you a bitch. No, not you, the listener. The diss track by Tweety Bird Loc featuring faux clips aimed at Queen Latifah. A pretty unwarranted diss track in my opinion, as he was basically responding to Queen Latifah's track N.W.A. But I can't deny that the track is one I enjoy for its humor and brazenness. Just listen to that chorus. Fuck Compton. The classic diss track by Bronx rapper Tim Dog aimed at the city of Compton. This song right here set off the whole East Coast versus West Coast rap beef that lasted throughout the 90s. The track was aimed mainly at N.W.A, but the whole gangbanging culture of the West Coast at the time was a target as well. Infrared. Before there was the Story of Adidon, there was Infrared from Pusha T's third solo album, Daytona. The Ye produced 7-track album that was part of the Wyoming sessions. This was a prelude of sorts for what was in store for Drake from Pusha. Drake responded to the diss here with Duppy Freestyle, which led to Story of Adidon. Kill Shot. In response to MGK's Rap Devil track, which itself was a response to the Eminem track Not Alike, M dropped Kill Shot, which some would say was the kill shot that took MGK out of rap, as he started making rock music shortly afterwards. Back to back. Drake's follow-up to his first diss track to Meek, Charge It Up, and that track clearly got him charged enough to release a scathing diss track to Meek Mill. Back to Back was not only a diss track, but it was a hit song as well. It certainly wasn't the hardest song or anything, but it was a hit played everywhere, and that just had to hurt Meek a bit. Not to mention it had some pretty good lines about Meek and his relationship with Nicki Minaj. I'm sure we all know that classic line, which became a viral thing. No Vaseline, Part 2. One of the diss tracks Corrupt from the Dog Pound sent to people like Snoop, Daz, and others because of them departing Death Row Records. Corrupt raps over the beat to No Vaseline first, and then raps over the beat to the Murder With the Case remix. Classic beats, and Corrupt does his thing as usual. Next up, Thuggish Ruggish Busters. The diss track from Tommy Wright III to Bone Thugs and Harmony for the comment Bone Thugs said about Memphis, Tennessee during an interview. Tommy Wright took it upon himself to respond to the group and lit them right up with some vicious lines. The song title comes from the debut hit single by Bone Thugs and Harmony, Thuggish Ruggish Bone, from their EP Creepin' on a Come Up. Next up we have My Bitch. Once again, no, not the listeners, but the Game track taking aim at not just former label mate turned enemy 50 Cent, but also Jay-Z and oddly enough, Suge Knight as well. Game is known for having a plethora of diss tracks, but this right here is one of my favorites and one that I don't see mentioned often. Rap Devil. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think Rap Devil is one of the best diss tracks someone has had going at Eminem. This track is what prompted Eminem to release the Kill Shot track that I mentioned earlier that so many attribute to MGK turning away from hip hop. Next up, 300 Bars and Runnin'. This list just wouldn't be complete without the classic Game diss track to G-Unit. 300 Bars and Runnin' sees Game going hard at the whole crew and even sending shots at the singer Olivia, who was signed to G-Unit for a time as well. Around 20 different beats are sampled during this track. I could dang near make a list this long with just diss tracks by G-Unit and the Game, with how many rap beefs they've been in. Truth. The classic Gucci Mane track going at Young Jeezy. Gucci and Jeezy had a long-lasting beef, which I've talked about on the channel previously, and this track right here is my personal favorite diss track between the two, as well as one of the harder-hitting ones from around that time in hip-hop. Gucci disses Jeezy with the truth, and makes mention of Pookie Loc, the man that Gucci shot and killed in self-defense when they attempted to break into his place and rob him. Stay Strapped. Just like the previous track, this is a part of the Gucci and Jeezy beef, and this is my personal favorite diss track from Jeezy in the beef. Stay Strapped has Jeezy rapping over the beat to the classic T.I. track, ASAP. And he even mentions Gucci's mother in the track. This is also where the alleged bounty for Gucci's chain came from. Over Part 2. The diss track from Jay-Z's former mentor, Jaz-O, to Rockefeller artists like Memphis Bleek and State Property. Jaz-O raps over the beat for the hit Nori single, Nothing. Jaz-O really shows why he's the originator here. He destroys his protege and his protege's protege, funny enough. Next up, Go Harder. Just like the previous track, this one is a part of the Jay-Z and Jaz-O beef, which I've also covered on the channel. Go Harder has Jaz-O rapping over the beat to the Jay-Z track, Brooklyn Go Hard, from the Notorious film soundtrack. As the title implies, Jaz definitely went harder in my opinion. Next up, King of the Hill. No, not the classic TV show that I grew up watching, but the song from Westside Connection's debut album, Bow Down. King of the Hill is a diss track aimed at Cypress Hill, as problems had occurred between Ice Cube and the members of Cypress Hill, which I've gone into detail in on my video covering the beef between the two groups. Despite being a Westside Connection track, it's just Cube and Mac 10 rapping on the song. WC, being cool with Cypress Hill still, refrained from dissing them, but the other two more than held their own. Next up, Ice Cube Killer. Like the previous track, this is a diss track involving Cypress Hill and Westside Connection. As you can probably tell from the title, Ice Cube Killer is a diss track aimed mainly at Ice Cube, and it is a response to King of the Hill and uses the same beat. It even features an Ice Cube impersonator on the track, which makes it sound like Cube is dissing himself, and makes the track that much funnier. Next up, Nail in the Coffin. One of the best diss tracks from the beef between Eminem and Benzino over the Source magazine. Probably a self-explanatory title, but this was M putting the metaphorical nail in the coffin of the Source magazine and Benzino's rap career. After this, many people considered the beef a victory for M, understandably so. Next up, Hit 'Em Up. Like I said in my video regarding Tupac's diss track Hit 'Em Up, it's not the best diss track of all time and not even the best diss track by Pac, but it's good enough to make this list. It was yet another diss aimed at Biggie and Puff mainly, but who can forget that outro where Pac went off on numerous other New York rappers like Mobb Deep and Chino XL. Piggy Bank. From 50 Cent's Massacre album, this was a track that took aim at 50's enemies at the time like Fat Joe, Jadakiss, Shine, and Ja Rule. This was 50's response to Fat Joe and Jadakiss getting on the New York track with Ja Rule. He also dissed Nas and Shine while he was at it. Next up, Blueprint 2. After Takeover, Nas released Ether. Then Jay-Z responded with Super Ugly, which was not looked upon too well, and things died down for a bit. However, Jay came back on his next album, Blueprint 2, with this title track, which was a more calculated diss track taking aim at Nas for things like his hypocritical views in certain songs like You Owe Me or Black Girl Lost and the like. Next up, Hail Mary. Not the original by Tupac and the Outlaws, but the version with Eminem, 50 Cent, and Busta Rhymes. This was once again another part of the 50 Cent and Ja Rule beef, and yes, 50 Cent pretty much makes the most appearances on this list. Beef is kinda his thing. Busta Rhymes, however, is probably the one that had my favorite performance on this diss track though. Next up, Exodus 23-1. Yes, Pusha T makes another appearance on this list too. Exodus 23-1 predates Infrared and the story of Adidon as diss tracks and is aimed at Lil Wayne and Drake, continuing Push's longtime beef with Birdman Lil Wayne, going all the way back to when they collaborated on the Birdman track, What Happened to That Boy. Next up, Hate Me Now. No, not the Nas version, classic track, but the Cam'ron version. Cam'ron takes aim at Nas and raps over the beat for the classic Nas song Hate Me Now from his I Am album. A lot of the songs on this list have some pretty heinous lines, but not many hit as hard as Cam'ron having a line about having his way with Nas's daughter, like R. Kelly did on that infamous sex tape with the urine. Not to mention he also made a reference to Nas's mother too, who had recently passed away from illness. Next up, a Nas track. Destroy and Rebuild sees Nas doing as the title says. In order to destroy and rebuild, he disses fellow Queens rappers Cormega, Prodigy from Mod Deep, Nature from The Firm, and he even sends a jab at Jay-Z while he's at it. Live By Your Rep. From the Live By Your Rep EP by 3 6 Mafia, this track takes aim at Bone Thugs and Harmony. Along with the Bone Thugs diss track from fellow Memphis rapper Tommy Wright III, I covered this in my video on Bone Thugs and Harmony versus 3 6 Mafia, as the beef really turned into Bone Thugs and Harmony versus Memphis. Next up, Badass. The Troy Ave diss track aimed at Joey Badass. This track right here was pretty controversial because of the line from Troy about fellow Brooklyn rapper Capital Steez, who was a friend of Joey who committed suicide from jumping off the roof of a building back in 2012. It was definitely a low blow, that much is true, but this is about diss tracks, so it makes the list for me. Next up, Fuck With Dre Day, the classic diss track from Dr. Dre's solo debut album, Chronic. Dre and Snoop take shots at not only Eazy-E, but Uncle Luke as well as Tim Dog. The line I mentioned earlier in the diss track from Eazy-E is a reference to this track right here. Paper Plates. From Jizza's 5th solo album, Pro Tools, this track was aimed at 50 Cent for his shots at Wu-Tang members like Raekwon, Ghostface, and RZA on the track How to Rob. Jizza pretty effortlessly dismantles 50 and G-Unit. Kinda like there's some disposable paper plates, you might say. Speaking of G-Unit, we have the next track, Showtime. Another diss track between The Game and G-Unit. This one coming from G-Unit member Lloyd Banks, who tore into Game viciously. Banks disses him for 50 Cent writing on Game's documentary album and goes as far to tell Game that the next time he thinks about killing himself, he should just do it. Up next, Acknowledge. From Master Ace's second solo album, Disposable Arts, he takes aim at the Philadelphia rap duo High and Mighty on his first verse over what was later found out to be a misunderstanding, and this is the rapper Boogeyman in his second verse in response to Boogeyman's diss track, Just You Wait, which was aimed at him over Boogeyman perceiving Master Ace to having copied one of his songs. Next up, What Would You Do? From Eazy-E's second album, Straight Off the Streets of Motherfucking Compton, which was released almost a year after he passed, another one of the diss tracks from Eazy-E to Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, following Dre's departure from N.W.A. and Ruthless Records. Next up, Put Your Hands Up. One of the many tracks from the back and forth between Jadakiss and Beanie Sigel and their respective groups. Beanie raps over the beat for the Jadakiss track Put Your Hands Up and has several lines that just completely attack Jadakiss in every freaking manner. Next up, Raid, the diss track from Cassidy aimed at Meek Mill. Raid is short for Robert Ass is Dead, as Meek's first name is Robert. The track is over 10 minutes long and Cassidy raps over a dozen different beats and bars Meek up on every single one. Next up, Afraid. The third of the trio of diss tracks, rapper turned podcaster Joe Budden released at Drake in the midst of their beef. Joe deconstructs Drake from start to finish and even samples the track The Resistance from Drake's debut album Thank Me Later for this scathing diss track. And last but certainly not least, number 50. You Got to Love It from Cameron's fifth album Killa Season. This track takes aim at Jay-Z. In typical Cam fashion, it's one of the funniest diss tracks on this list. Throughout the intro, he disses Jay-Z for things like allegedly taking Rockefeller from Dame Dash, as well as Rockaware, and even disses him for wearing sandals of jeans. Now, for those of you that are still listening, I have left a link in the description box below with a playlist that I made containing all 50 of these diss tracks. So make sure to check that out, along with all the other links in the description box. Subscribe to the channel, and of course, join the Discord server. And keep on enjoying hip hop. I'll catch you guys next time.